So, if you guys can't tell, I'm excited about Christmas. How many of you guys out there are Christmas addicts like myself? Yeah, she'd have her hand up. This whole side hates Christmas, apparently. Okay. Give me a couple of your favorite, raise your hand. Give me a couple of parts of your favorite things about Christmas. Definitely. Hot chocolate and pumpkin pie. Jesus' birthday. All right. What's your favorite part? Grandma's cookies. You know, my mom makes these things called spritz cookies. They're like these little tiny things, and they're a little crunchy. You put it, it's like butter, and it melts. Oh, it's so good. Oh. What? The presents. Let's be honest. Okay. Your own homemade cookies? I don't believe that they're good. You'll have to bring them next week. Okay. No, you stay over there. Okay. What's your favorite part? The food? I thought you said scars. Hot chocolate and scars. I like stabbing things. It's awesome. No, scarves. Things that we wear. Jeff, what's your favorite? Shh. Eggnog. It's a Lingefeld thing, apparently. What's your favorite? What? Ooh, you mean Hallmark movies, right? Hallmark movies, yeah. I love it. There's a post right now that's going around. There's a post on the internet right now that's going around that's like, hey, am I going to watch the 25 days of Hallmark movies? And is Susan going to get with the small town farmer versus the big CEO? Yes, and I'm going to love every bit of it. That's right. That's what it is. Yes. Okay, so we're going to shift gears. Thank you for being excited about Christmas. For those that are excited about Christmas. But hey, listen. So Christmas is so much more than the decorations, right? We know that, right? It's so much more than the lights and the sounds, the long lines, all the stuff that we end up getting. And I think a lot of times the focus of Christmas gets lost in all that junk, right? So we're going to be starting this new series called Chains. And this isn't actually your typical Christmas thing. Here's the reality. We probably only have 3 or 4 more weeks before we're going to be at Christmas season for Refuge. And so we're starting now so that we can get through this series. And this series is called Chains. And like I said, it's not the typical one, but I pray that this lesson helps bring you some freedom and helps you break through some things that might keep us captive spiritually. These next 3 lessons that we're going to be focusing on are actually based on a Christmas classic. It was a book, and it became a movie, and then a movie, and then a movie, and a movie, and a movie, and a movie, and a movie, multiple times over. And this story is A Christmas Carol. Anybody read this? Read, not just watched, read it first. How about watched it? Okay. If you've never seen it, I will tell you that there's one rendition that you have to watch. It's the Muppets Christmas Carol. It's the best one. It's the best one. But there's also one with a guy, Professor X from X-Men. He does one, and that's pretty good too. But there's a scene in these movies where Jacob Marley, who was Ebenezer Scrooge's partner in life, visits Ebenezer Scrooge. He comes back to him, right? And the creepiest part about this season, or this actual part of this, is that Jacob has been dead for 7 years. When Charles Dickens wrote this was supposed to be partly horror, and nowadays we kind of watch it and just don't think too much about it. So what I want to do is play a clip for you, and I want you guys to just watch for a minute.
Why do you doubt your senses?
Because the littlest thing can affect them. A slight disorder of the stomach can make them cheat. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are. Dreadful aberration! Why do you trouble me?
A man of worldly mind, do you believe in me or not?
I do! I must! You are fitted in chains. Why?
I wear the chain I forged in life. I've made it link by link and yard by yard. Do you recognize its pattern? Can you imagine the weight and length of the chain you bear? It was as heavy and long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. Yours is a ponderous chain.
Jacob, tell me no more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob.
So here's something that I wanted to focus on tonight. I wear the chain I forged in life, replied the ghost. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it in my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. And then he asks Ebenezer Scrooge something in this, and I don't know if you guys have paid attention to that part, but he said, can you imagine what your chain looks like? Can you imagine the things that you forged in life that you carry with you? And that's the premise of the series. For the next 3 weeks, we're going to be looking at the Bible and asking 3 questions, okay? Number 1, what would your life look like if you had to wear your spiritual self on the outside? Number 2, what is keeping you from experiencing God fully? Number 3, what do you, once you become free of those chains, what do you want? And I'm going to start with a story. I like telling stories, so I'm going to start with this story. When I was 16 years old, how many of you in here are 16 or older? How many of you want a car? How do you put your hand down? When I was 16, I wanted a car so bad. So bad. That was like the only thing that was I focused on. And this is right when Fast and the Furious, the first one, came out. So everybody was excited about like little tiny Honda sports cars and making them look all nice and fast and stuff. And here's the deal. I wanted the most ridiculous car, the fastest car, but I had no money. And so those cars were about $20,000 out of my budget, right? So when I moved in with my father, I started talking to him about getting a vehicle, and I finally convinced him that I needed to have my own set of wheels so he didn't have to drive me around anymore. And I convinced him that there was a car that I really wanted that my friend had that was a lowered Honda CRX. Anybody know what a Honda CRX is? It's this little, it looks like a bread box kind of, little tiny car. I'm a big guy. I was a big guy back then, probably not as big as I am now, but back then I was a big guy. It was a lowered car with rims on it, and it was flat black. It was like matte black. And I was like, this is the car for me. I need this car. I need it. So we went to go look at the car, and my dad kept on saying to me, are you sure? Do you want this car? Do you really think this is worthwhile? And I said, yes, this is the one. And what really sold me is it had gunmetal rims on it. Oh, it looked so good. And I was like, all right. So I get this thing home, right? And it didn't take me long to realize that I just bought a hunk of junk. Like, I paid $700, and my dad said to me, if you want this vehicle, this is it. You're not going to get another vehicle. This is your vehicle. You need to take care of it. You need to make sure that it works right. And he helped me with things on it, but he said, this is the amount of money you decided to spend. This is it. So the bottom of the car was rusting out. So I have a lowered car with a rusty bottom. Most likely, if I'm going too fast, I might hit my butt and it will fall out. I had an emergency brake that didn't work. My exhaust fell off about 2 weeks later. So my car just going backfiring. It was awesome. The clutch blew out in 2 months. And I found out that the paint job was done with a spray can. And the car was originally light blue. And I don't know if you know anything about police officers, but they love pulling over people when they look young and dumb, like I did at that time, and had a car that didn't match exactly what my plate should have said. So I was always getting harassed by them because I just had this spray-painted vehicle. Well, eventually, the water pump, which is a really important part of the engine, blew out, and it overheated the top of my engine, and it basically seized it up, so it didn't work anymore. So I have this vehicle that I paid $700 for that's in my garage that does nothing. And my dad stuck to his guns. He said, well, that's the car you wanted. That's what you wanted. That's what you get. And it was a really valuable lesson for me, but I wasn't going to get a car right away. Eventually, that thing had to go to the junkyard. So what's the point of this story? Why am I telling this story to you? It's because sometimes our chains might look cool. See, that car was actually more hassle than it was worth, but I was worried about the appearance of it. I was worried about what I thought was the value of it, and I missed the true value of it. And the same thing happens with our spiritual chains. Things happen in our lives where we actually think that this is going to look better for us, this is a better shelf for us, this is where we should be going in life, and it's actually just weighing us down. See, sometimes the things that look the best may not be the best for us. How many of you actually ever heard that before? Or something close to that? How many have ever heard that? See, if you don't know that, you or haven't heard that, you probably have an idea that that's a real thing. And some of us have heard it 1,000 times, but why do people say it so often? Because it's true, right? Just because we think it might be good for us, it might not be good for us. It might be said also because we don't understand it. People have to keep on saying it. And I'll tell you, when I've worked for teenagers for so many years, man, I will tell you I have told kids over and over and over the same thing, and they just don't get it sometimes. And that's a hard thing to handle. But I remember being a teenager and people telling me the same thing over and over and over, and not until later on in my life did I see the value in what they were saying. See, if we got it the first time, we would never need to hear it so many times. Today we're going to focus on 1 Peter, and this is written by Peter. Okay, so there you go. And Peter was somebody that decided that he was going to write this letter to persecuted Christians that were mocked, ridiculed, cast out, and sometimes murdered. And I think that the first part of this, the mocked, ridiculed, or cast out, maybe you can identify with that. And this is why I find this to be so important to our culture today, is that this is something that happens a lot. In fact, on yesterday, there was a group that came into Altoona High School, Attaboy, a music group, correct? Am I right? And their whole goal was to talk about anti-bullying. If you weren't mocked, ridiculed, or looked down upon, do you think we would need to have them there? So here's the deal. 1 Peter chapter 2 says this: so get rid of all evil behavior. Be done with deceit, hypocrisy, jealousy, and all unkind speech. Like newborn babies, you must crave pure spiritual milk so that you will grow into the full experience of salvation. Cry out for this nourishment, and now that you have had a taste of the Lord's kindness. And today's lesson is called Ghost of the Past. What if? If you know anything about the Christmas Carol, the first ghost, the ghost of Christmas past, takes Scrooge back to when he was little. And I'm going to challenge you now to think back, and maybe this isn't a big stretch for you. Maybe you don't know much about Jesus. Maybe you've heard his name. But think about maybe your beginning walk and journey with Jesus, right? And here's something I want to challenge you with is during Christmas season, people get excited about Jesus' birth. But if we don't know what the man Jesus did, it's real hard to understand why we're excited about Jesus' birth. You don't understand the commitment and the promises that were put in the Bible to get you to the point of Jesus' birth and why we celebrate it. And so what I'm asking today is that we focus on when we were baby Christians. And like I said, that might not be a stretch for you. In this passage, we're called to get rid of things in our lives that keep us chained. And I will be very blunt with you. It's called sin. Most people don't want to address it as sin. Most people don't want to see it that way. They want to say that it's too harsh to call things like that sin. I think when we start calling sin sin, we begin to recognize the stranglehold that has on our lives. I heard it once said this: love without truth is a lie. And I believe if I only told you the warm and fuzzy stuff, I'd be lying to you and I'd be doing a disservice. If there wasn't tension, Scrooge wouldn't have woke up a changed man, right? Anybody watch the rest of this, you'll know that he wakes up as a changed man. And if we didn't learn about sin, we could be living in sin. We wouldn't know that there needed to be a change. The good news in all of this is that Peter shows us how to get out of that sin. He says in this verse, he says, drink milk. Think about a baby, right? Let's think about a little 7-pound, 8-ounce little baby. If you're going to keep a baby alive, you're not going to feed it Doritos. No, you're not going to feed it Doritos. I promise you, you will not feed it Doritos. If you want that baby to be nourished and to grow, you're going to need to feed it milk or formula. That's what you're going to need to do. And if you feed it Mountain Dew, that's going to be bad news too. So don't be doing that either. If you don't feed that baby milk or formula, it's called malnourishment. And eventually they can end up dying. So as a Christian, if we're called to drink milk, if we're called to be fed, and you don't do that, and you have an encounter with Jesus, and then you decide that's it, I'm a new baby Christian, but I'm not going to be fed during that time, you're going to die. And most likely, it's going to be underneath the weight of those chains that you just learned about. In Psalms, David writes this, don't keep looking at my sins, remove the stain of my guilt. Create in me a clean heart, O God, renew a loyal spirit within me. Do not banish me from your presence. And don't take your Holy Spirit away from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and make me willing to obey you. See, this is actually a cry of a man that holds the relationship with God at a higher value than anything else. David knew that our lives changed when we got closer to God, and we should know that our lives get closer, change when we get closer to Jesus. He's calling out God to take away the wickedness from him, to remove the chains and let him find joy in God. See, David's past could have easily kept him hostage. He did some pretty messed up things, and if you read the Bible, you can find that he committed adultery with a neighbor. He sent the neighbor's husband to the front line and basically gave him a death sentence. He did some stuff that was bad news. And yet he prays to God to restore his spirit. See, David could have let this sin eat him up inside. He could have actually pushed it to the back of his mind. He could have tried to carry his chains by himself, but he didn't. He gave his chains to God. He said, this is my burden. These are the things of my past that are holding me down, and I'm going to give it up. That's what I'm going to do. Anybody out there know anything about leprosy? A couple people. Alex, what's leprosy, man? Your skin falls off. Yeah, so during biblical times, here's the idea of leprosy is if you have a skin disease, you are unclean. And you are cast out from our community. See, leprosy is actually a skin disease that causes nerve damage and loss of feeling in limbs for those that actually had this. And it often ended up with people losing their limbs, whether it be through injury or co-infections or continuous issues. They would end up being in a place because they couldn't feel pain, not knowing that they were causing harm to themselves. And then the infections and diseases that cause skin disfiguration were all sent away from the community. So not only would you have leprosy, but you might have somebody with an infection that would cause more issues right next to you. And guaranteed, you're probably going to catch what they got. So it's going to be worse. You were sentenced to a life of pain and almost certain death. See, back in biblical times, leprosy was considered incurable. And I will tell you this, our sin is uncurable if we don't give it to Jesus. David recognized that he needed to be cleansed of his sins, and we cannot ask Jesus to take our chains without recognizing that we need to change. See, the best part about Jesus stepping into our lives and taking those chains from us, he doesn't actually put stipulations on this. He doesn't put a weight on this and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to take those chains from you, but you're going to owe me a favor tomorrow. He doesn't say that. He says, you know what, you're free. I stepped in for you, and there's no stipulations attached to this. And we need to be as desperate for Jesus as we are for the air that we breathe. There are three things that I want you to focus on. As Christians, we need to be these three things: Jesus dependent, Jesus obsessed, and Jesus fueled. And I talk about this all the time. People talk about coming to Refuge or going to church or whatever, and I'm going to get filled up for the week. I'm going to take it on. You know what? That I find that to be kind of disheartening. Because here's the deal. I need to be Jesus dependent, so that means I need to be plugged into Jesus all the time. I need to be Jesus fueled, which means I need to continuously be plugged into him. And just like a vacuum cleaner that's plugged into the wall, what happens when you go too far when the cord falls out, and then what happens? Shuts off, right? So stop thinking you need to be just fueled up one time. Keep on going. Stay plugged in. When I was in college, I had a group of friends. And I've gone through cycles in my life where I've struggled with things. But when I was in college, I had a group of friends that I would consider my best friends. And if you plan on any next steps to your life, you'll find people that you're gonna be around. But I'll tell you, for me, college was one of those places that I learned a lot about who what my true identity was. And the first couple years that I was there, you could spend every night with the same people. I love spending time with them. When I went to college, I was supposed to wrestle, right? And I got there and I decided that it was going to be too much work and I wanted to have too much fun. So I stepped away from doing any collegiate sports. And the coach wasn't really too pleased with me for some of the things that I was doing and inviting the wrestlers to come and do those with me. See, and anybody have friends that your parents say, don't hang out with that kid? Or maybe you are that kid and you don't know, your hands are down, you're like, man. Well, I'll be honest with you, I was that kid. I was that kid that people would be like, we want to hang out with that guy. And that's what the coaches said. They came back and they said to the wrestlers, you know what? Those guys are doing bad things. Stay away from them because they're going to get you in trouble. I was a bad influence. See, they said this: we don't think he's a good influence on you, and you should spend less time hanging out with him, and there might be consequences to it. I was mad, man. Like, somebody called me out that I didn't even have a real relationship with. They were telling me that I can't hang out with my friends. See, the problem with this was I kept inviting people to do things that affected them in a negative way, that actually challenged their moral code. The things that they knew that they shouldn't be doing, I was presenting that for them. I invited them to participate in activities that I shouldn't have been a part of and they shouldn't have been a part of. See, and as I grew a little bit, my idea of fun was less and less their idea of fun. And then we grew apart. But as I got older and Jesus grabbed a hold of my heart and he changed the way that I perceived things, I saw my friendships with those that were on the outskirts that I was doing things with, not my close, intricate friends, but those on the outskirts, those relationships began to dwindle. What was the cause of that? What was the reason why I lost those friendships? See, I was changing into a new person, and God was removing the chains off of me. And you don't want to hang out with somebody that you might feel convicted by. That didn't mean I cut myself off from everyone. That didn't mean I became a social pariah, but it did change how I looked at my community. It did change on who I felt accountable to. It did change the relationships, what I believed Jesus was telling me to do. And if I felt convicted on something, I was going to stand firm on that because I needed to drink my milk. And when I got strong enough, then it was time for bread. And then it was time for meat. And when I got to that place, no one can move me because I'm strong enough to walk on my own. But if I let those chains bury me, or if I let those people feed me Doritos, or what we say, Mountain Dew over here, if we let people feed me Doritos and Mountain Dew when I'm a baby Christian, I might die. Peter says this, of course your former friends are very surprised when you no longer join them in the wicked things that you do, and they will say evil things about you. I'll promise you this, if you're not walking right in your life and you have friends that are in that same place as you will find that those relationships become separated. I will promise you that. That does not mean that both of you can't walk towards Jesus. Does not mean that you cannot reconcile your friendships. But when one person goes one way and another one goes the other, you're no longer together. When I was in high school, when I started to change my life, people would call me hurtful things, man. Just things that would just tear me apart. And one of the things that stuck with me most was useless. Someone tell me, Ryan, you're useless. How many of you ever been called useless? I don't know if it carries a lot of weight on your heart, but for me, I need to know that I have value. I need to know that there's a reason why I'm here. I need to know that the people that I said that I love actually love me back and that they think that there's value inside of me. See, I was starting to find a true identity in God, and others were thinking I was useless. One thing I learned while I was struggling through this, and I want you to think about this, I want you to pay attention to this, you have to choose what's more important. The weight of your chains or the way of God. And I'll tell you, it's not easy as a teenager to think about this stuff. And most of you, you might be in a place where, all right, I'm going to make a step forward, but then all of a sudden my friends are going to pull me back in. I will tell you something, that this is more important. The way of God is way more important than any acceptance that your friends can give you. See, Peter's teaching us in this passage that Christianity isn't just a concept to agree with. It's actually a lifestyle that we're supposed to walk. And living this way is not easy, and especially as a teenager, it's not. When we choose to live by our beliefs, we face tension, change, and discipline. That's what we need when we're changing. If I told you I was going to become a vegan tomorrow, right? You can giggle, but let's say I'm here, I roll up, I'm like, oh, listen, guys, watch this documentary. It's called Vegucated. It just changed my life. It's good. It's good. And I'm a vegan now. And then I reach into a bag and I pull out a juicy hamburger and start eating it. Nope. It's a burger with bacon on it because that's what I like. That's what I like. It wouldn't be sense. It wouldn't make any sense. It actually wouldn't work, right? Right? I wouldn't be a vegan, like you said. Yeah, we do it all the time when it comes to our own faith. I'm going to convict you on this because this is really important, right? Listen to this. All the time, we hear kids saying, yeah, I'm a Christian. But then you watch them, and in their actions, and the way they respond to others, and their lack of love for one another, you tell that they might not be following what Jesus has called them to do. We might understand the concept, but living it out might be something different. There were so many times I was doing things that I knew I shouldn't have been doing, at places I knew I shouldn't have been, but I would still claim to be a Christian, and I would say that I was a hypocrite. Just like 1 Peter said, to shed hypocrisy, I was living hypocrisy. 1 Peter 2:16a says this, you are not slaves, you are free, but your freedom is not an excuse to do evil. See, our friends should be able to see that there's a difference in our lives, not just because we say it, because we live it. And some of them may not like it. They may get mad at you. You may lose them. They might say some bad things about you. Because no one wants to. Anybody heard the saying, misery loves company? Yeah. See, when you're doing bad things, you like to have other people with you so you can say it's okay. I've had people call me and tell me things that they're doing because they're waiting for me to tell them that it's okay because they want to feel better about the situation that they're living in. I'm going to tell you this story, and I want you to be adults about this. So I know this is hard. We got some young bucks, some old bucks, whatever it might be, some young does, some old does on here. But here's the deal. In the 90s, right, there was a TV show. Are you guys familiar with a show called Friends? Yes, we are familiar with a show called Friends, okay? In the 90s, pornography was considered something that was morally wrong. And at the same time in the 90s, the most watched TV show was Friends. Well, funny story, they did a whole episode where Ross, Joey, and Chandler just watched pornography the whole time. The whole time. The whole show. They normalized watching pornography. They decided that it was okay that everybody did it. It became culturally normal and accepted to have an addiction to pornography because it was widely accepted that everybody did it. Through the world's most popular TV show at the time. And I would challenge you, we're actually called to live differently than the world. We are called to do that. If no one stands up and says that it's wrong, then everyone's going to believe that it's right. It'll keep happening. I guarantee you, if you make a stand in the world, you better be strong. You better be ready for kickback. You better have drunk your milk and shed your chains. And I think this sounds all well and good, and I like this stuff, but I want to ask the question, where is the hope? Where is the hope here? If I'm equipping you to go to battle, where's your hope? How are you shedding your chains so you can be a better soldier and getting fed so that you're strong enough to go? Where is the hope? Let's look at chapter 4, verse 8. It says this, most important of all, continue to show deep love for each other. For love covers a multitude of sins. 1 John says this, God is able, that's good. God is love. More of Jesus in our lives equals more love and forgiveness. When our attitudes become love, all the time love, because it's displayed through our relationship with Christ, people can see that on our face in the way that we actually live. When our love for Jesus becomes an everyday craving, and this is what I'm talking about right here, guys. When I talk about drinking milk, it's an everyday craving. I'm going to give you a couple things I want to look at. How many of you feel weird if you miss church? Raise your hand. If you miss church on Sunday, you feel weird about it. How many of you feel weird if you miss refuge on Wednesday? How many of you feel weird if you don't read your Bible? Hands start going down. How many of you feel weird if you're not praying? How many of you feel weird if you don't have accountability when you're struggling through sin? And I'll be honest with you, I'll tell you what, sometimes in my life I struggle with those things. But that's how you get equipped. That's your hope. See, this is what happens when our spiritual life is shown physically. We shed those chains and people can see the love out of us. Seek Jesus more Surround yourself with people that keep you accountable to your actions. Be thirsty for his word. Learn about, I'm so tired of hearing this, and I will tell you this, I just wish God would speak to me. We got a book like this big that tells us what Jesus has to say. Get to work. Read. I'm not trying to be mean. I love you guys, but I'm so tired of that. If you want to know about Jesus, you got a chance. There are people that are dying for that opportunity. Dying for it. See, if you can't contain the love that God has shown you, it'll radiate out of you. People will see it off of you. This is when those chains we created for ourselves start to fall off. And it's a continuous battle, guys. This is how we stop listening to what others say and worrying about what their conviction is going to be and start living fully dependent on God. But more importantly, when our lifestyle becomes that of love and love always and love all, we are less apt to become people who are controlled by our sinful nature. Despite the things people will say, we can show love because we've been immersed in the love from Jesus. In A Christmas Carol, at the end of the story, Scrooge is with the last ghost. And he says this, and I want you to think about this. He says, I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. And then he says this, and he's begging for this. He says, oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writing on this stone. This is when he's looking at his tombstone. Guys, I want you to close your eyes for a minute. We're going to wrap up here. I want you to think about this. I want you to focus on this. Can you collectively say during this time of Christmas that you're going to focus on shedding off those chains that have wore down on you so heavily? Can we take a stance in our spiritual lives this Christmas season? Can we collectively say this? Can we say, Jesus, I'm desperate for your redemption. I'm desperate for the relationship. And I'm desperate for the nourishment. I need you every day to take my chains and to keep shedding them off of me. Jesus, I need you more in my life so I can become more like you. This is a real important one, and I'm going to challenge you guys with this. I want your prayer to be, Jesus, help me love others. Help me love those that I have a hard time loving, not just the ones that are easy. And Jesus, help others see love in me. See, I believe this is honoring Christmas all year round. And God, I'm going to lay this out, Lord. I just ask that tonight we just begin to start a stirring of the hearts. Lord, be challenged by the things that we've been able to hear tonight. Lord, I just ask that you help us find a way to be accountable to one another. Lord, we need you. We need you to grow and to be strengthened. And God, I just ask that Refuge be one of those places where we can start to feed. Lord, thank you for these kids. Thank you for their passions, their gifts, their talents. God, I just ask that you watch over them as the week goes on. In your name, amen.